Hi, welcome to the first virtual Open Security Summit sessions of 2021. These are, regular, now monthly sessions that we do, and it's all about, exchanging information, sharing knowledge, learning from each other. And they're open. We want you to contribute, to be involved, to participate, and in this case, we have a very great start of the week where we're going to basically start talking about threat modeling and how to make it scale and how to make it work in a kind of remote way, which most of us are working these days. But I think also in the future, I feel that this is going to solve a number of problems that I've also seen with threat modeling, because it's quite challenging to get the right people in the right room. So I think the practices that we'll develop now will help with this. And over to you, Didar.
So thank you, Dinesh. So thank you all for making time. And I see we have a very global audience today. That's really nice. So threat modeling. So this actual topic has come from the last month's sessions where we were discussing about threat modeling, and people were interested in a session having a session about how effectively to do threat modeling. So I'm sure we have all tried some methods. I personally have been in a cornucopia exercise and also some whiteboarding, and there have been good sides to both of them and also not very practical sides to both of them as well. So I do want to open it to the floor, but before I do that, I want to give word to James, do a quick introduction from his side as well.
After finding the mute button. Yeah, I'm James Bohr. I do a lot of threat modeling training, which is why I said I'd help Didar out with this one. I think that covers it introduction-wise.
That's great. So whiteboarding. Let's start with whiteboarding. I'm sure many of us had to use it, and in many ways it is quite effective. It's you can collaborate with different tools with different people, but how scalable it is? Does anybody want to share any experiences on how they did threat modeling with whiteboarding and any tips, tricks they would like to share? This is the part where you come off mute and share your experiences.
I'll kick it off for comfort. I mean, I'm almost religious about the power of the whiteboard for threat modeling, but part of that is not the big wall-mounted whiteboards. It's people having their own ones and then using different scales, different scopes for different teams. You can build a threat model out of different components, so it becomes scalable because you have people focusing on building a threat model for their area, and then you can start combining them.
So you mean people having their own whiteboards at home as well as something that are shared?
I highly recommend these things.
Small one.
You can do the same with paper or electronic whiteboards or similar, and you can sketch something out on one of these or on paper and transfer it online. It's just there's something about being able to draw, erase, and edit that makes it much easier to work through a threat model, I have found.
So you will still have a lot of people, and I say a lot of people, different stakeholder groups in the session, and some of them might be technical, some might not be too technical, but the technical ones would. How do you see the individual whiteboards being used in the session?
When you're doing a threat modeling session, you don't have everyone standing at the whiteboard trying to draw. You do have a person generally taking the comments and putting them down. So it's not that different. It's just making sure it's visible to everyone gets input, and the person who is taking it down is good at listening and good at interpreting and good at noting it so that everyone understands what's being drawn or what's being written.
Do you have any preferred tools for whiteboarding online?
No.
Yeah.
I can't stand online whiteboards. I do have a Wacom tablet when I absolutely have to do online whiteboarding, but I don't have a preferred tool because I don't particularly like the online whiteboards.
Like many people, I think, use Miro boards for many different purposes. Do we have anyone on call who would like to talk about tools for whiteboarding?
I'll throw it in some recent experience. So James, I agree with you. Whiteboarding is, and with mostly everybody, whiteboarding is really like the natural way to go and everything. The problem that I have with whiteboarding online is that, as you said, usually you have one person taking all the input, like in real life sessions, you have one person taking all the input and basically managing the whiteboarding. But sometimes, especially when things get heated, at least in my experience, somebody would just get up, go get the marker and start drawing over what's in there. And then you're going to have some discussion in front of the whiteboard and all that good stuff. And a lot of that dynamic gets lost online, especially when you have somebody managing the whiteboarding. And first, it gets very difficult for somebody to actually catch the attention button and start talking to that person who's doing the management. And I think that even the person who's drawing it serves as a sort of a filter between the person who's suggesting the change and the actual drawing. So sometimes you get either the person saying, hey, you know what, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I don't think that that's the way, so let's do it like this. And you end up in that discussion between the two of them. Or you start getting the no, not there, no, a bit up, no, you didn't do a circle, you did a rectangle, I want that to be a circle. So there's a lot of layers of interpretation that go in that translation between what's in my head and telling you what to do in this shared whiteboard. One recent experience that I had, and here I'm going to be really partial, and I'm sorry, it's using Pipeitm, the Python library to do threat modeling, but basically just the diagramming capabilities, which is basically taking code, translating into dot and generating a diagram from that. And the fun thing was the code was being shared by all the participants using Git. And there was a loop that was getting, like, it was pulling the latest Git and just showing it in the browser, running it through dot, generating the PNG, showing it in a browser. And everybody could see that thing. Like, of course, it wouldn't be real time. There was a small loop going on there, but everybody could change the code on their side, push it to the Git repository, get the thing pulled, refreshed, and actually see the diagram. So there was,
may I ask you something? So when you were doing this, did you have a separate video call open, or was it a telephone call? What type of?
It was a Zoom call, and there was like one browser showing one window showing the browser, and it wasn't by any way ideal. It wasn't, but it did give that feeling of people creating something together without those layers of interpretation between the person and the drawing. The drawing was by no means perfect. Anybody that worked with dot here knows that after a certain number of elements, dot gets really finicky. But the good thing is that at the end of the day, you come out not with a picture of a whiteboard, but you come out with codes that you can actually improve on and get the thing working.
So how big is the learning, or how steep is the learning curve for the tool?
If you know how to write any kind of object-oriented language, it's like immediate, because you're defining objects and putting on attributes. And in the case of like just doing a diagram, you don't even have the attributes. You're just creating connections between objects. But
can you show some examples?
Oh, gosh.
Or even maybe share your screen.
Oh, I was not ready
or even
for
the
this.
default one. Because I think what you're doing is amazing, man. Because I feel that's, I think the traditional whiteboard, it's a good way to start, right? It's a good way to go, basically you ask them, how does your system works? And if they don't know it, or if they don't have a good up-to-date information, they go to whiteboard. But I feel that for this to scale, and I would say that the thread modelings that some of them that I participated recently that were really effective was ones where a lot of the diagramming was done in advance, and we actually were able to spend the time in almost the thread modeling, actually consuming the information, finding then those blind spots, right? And then going, well, that doesn't match here, that doesn't match there. But and actually, as Petra, which I think joined the call, and Avas, who also for my team here, they can say, yeah, we took the freaking dot to an extreme, right, where it became really painful to maintain. But I think what you're describing, which is the programmatic creation of thread modeling components, is one of the ways to scale. Because, you know, especially as we build more CI pipelines and more automation in our pipelines, you can actually pre-create and grab that information from reality itself, right? So it's not even, this is what I think is happening. Ideally, you want to have thread models where we actually see diagrams created from reality.
Right, and it's important to say that I think that the idea was actually shown working sort of by Jonathan Marcel here at the OSS about, I don't know, what, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So
I remember, right?
He showed Pipeitm at the time, and it has evolved a bit, actually quite a bit, but it's not 100% yet. It's good, it's usable, it's not 100% yet.
Well, I don't think we have any 100% solution, right? Like if you look at thread
Otherwise,
modeling,
we wouldn't be having the conversation.
exactly, right? I don't think
we do have some. We do have some commercial or even Wasp Dragon that are pretty good, I think. But you know, Pipeitm, I just have this thing for the programmatic approach.
Yeah, I love it.
For the reasons that you listen. So just to show it really quick, I wasn't really thinking about doing this, but I think that the important things to show here are creating the element. So you're basically just creating an object like you would in any object-oriented language, and then connecting things by means of a data flow, which basically just says, hey, I'm connecting my Lambda to DB, and this is what goes over the flow. And once you just process that, what you get is this kind of diagram. So the caveat goes, we are still using dot at this time, and dot gets finicky after a number of objects. So you may have to divide into different diagrams just to keep things sane. But we are hoping to have a different graphics engine soon and do something better.
Have you looked at using Viz.js?
I did. And the problem is that we want to take the Unix approach to tools and like let a tool do what it's good at. The good thing about dot is that it manages the layout by itself.
But so does Viz.js.
I don't think so.
It does.
I'll check again. I'll check again, but if it does, I'll be happy to jump there. But I think that when I checked, it didn't, unless I'm confused with any of the other JS.
I'm just going to put the link on there to make sure we talk about this is the right thing, because.
Izar, I have a question.
Shoot.
So have you actually used this on something that's way more complex than this diagram that you're demoing? Because some architecture stuff that we have is, you know, extremely complex, and I find these kind of languages, you know, once things get very complex, things start to get out of hand, and it starts to get very buggy. And I find, like when we were trying to use PyML, for example, the relationships just kept being disrupted, and elements would end up suddenly to the left that were right, just because things were getting way more complex and things were getting way bigger. Because like for these kind of simple stuff, this looks pretty straightforward. But my question is, I don't know if you've tried to use it like on much more complex architecture, you know, architectures.
So here's the thing. Yes, it's been used for very complex stuff, but the caveat again goes that dot as an engine has difficulties with automatic layout. My counter to that is that if you are doing things that are so complex that they start getting muffled, then perhaps it's time to take a step back and say, shouldn't I divide these into more manageable things? So that's where the whole level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3 diagrams idea comes in. So you would have one simple one that shows the whole, and then zoom into this part and zoom into that part and zoom into the other part. I find that in my experience, there haven't been many times that I needed the full picture of something very complex in front of me to be able to threat model. In fact, I think that sometimes it would be detrimental, because it would make you would lose the tree for the forest.
I'm just thinking that through, and I was actually going to say, is there some way you could combine it with something like Prezi, so you can do that zoom in to individual components, so you abstract the components out at higher levels, and then you can zoom into them? Because I have had that experience of having to try and visualize the whole system, and so you just abstract away until it's manageable.
But that's the key, right? The thing about this, right, is I actually think that Dot and Vue.js, you know, I put the link in there, Izar, for the one that I use, right? What I mean by Vue.js, right, on the thing. Vue.js has an advantage that you have a little bit more control. It's JavaScript. There's a couple of tricks you can use, but you have a little bit more control where things go than Dot, right? But the advantage of doing it programmatically is actually almost makes it Dot being an intermediate language. So Dot becomes the intermediate representation before you hit the graph.
Mm-hmm.
We basically have a layer of data. You have a layer of programmatically consuming or creating, you know, that or more data, and then that creates the Dot language, which I think is what you're doing, right? Which actually is what TM is doing, right? And then that creates the graph.
Exactly.
And the advantage of this is you can now programmatically start to create, James, what you described, which is those zoom in and zoom out modes, right? Where you can have multiple slices, you know, because the reality is that, you know, you want a mode where the more interconnections you have in your fundamental graph, right, is what you want. In fact, Isaac, can you open up again that thing again?
Oh,
just
sure.
it's a cool example, right? Like fundamentally, it's a graph, right? It's a graph with nodes and edges, right? And then eventually we can make it a map, right? But initially we can start with a graph, because if you go back to your code, right, the reality is that this code is creating a graph, right? Because you're creating the relationships, right?
Yep.
But now you're creating the relationships programmatically, which basically means that, for example, what you want here should actually come from, let's say, an AWS security policy, right? This should actually come programmatically from config files, should come programmatic to whatever things are. So for example, like, you know, I'm getting one of my teams to do is a mode where we're deploying a whole bunch of servers. What I want to have is for example, a Lambda function that goes to the sources and creates a bunch of JSON files that has the actual reality, and then put that in Elasticsearch. And then you can actually take that and create visualizations like this, for example, that creates Dot language or Vue.js, who then gives you the diagram.
Right. I have one big concern about all of these methods, which is I absolutely love them. They do create a barrier to entry. You do have to learn the syntax and the language in order to threat model, and a lot of the time you want people non-technical involved in your threat modeling as well.
So that's the thing. It brings us back to the discussion that we had before in terms of the soft side of threat modeling, which is something that Adam Shostak has touched extensively, especially in the remote the remote side of it. And I would posit that while I am a very, very big proponent of everybody threats model all the time, I would say that the aspects that you get of the threat model at different levels are definitely different. So in this case, in the case of Pipeitm, we are trying to push it to the developer so that they maintain the threat model of their code together with their code. Now, I would say that people like product owners, other kinds of management, that kind of input, that will go much more to a different level of the threat model, which is the business side of it, which is defining who your attackers are, defining what level of threats are you trying to stand by.
But how do you then scale down from that business level to this development level? because that barrier potentially puts a block in there where you've got developers going off doing technical threat modeling, which is a wonderful thing, and everyone should do it. The business going off and doing business threat modeling, also a wonderful thing, everyone should do it. But the value really comes when you've linked those two, when the business threat model is influencing the development one and vice versa. So you've got that information, you've got those perspectives.
Can I jump in real quick? Because I asked it in the chat, but yeah, also I have this experience that you have like a system that is very large and not threat modeled, where you go into the larger like helicopter view DFDs and start threat modeling there. Whereas also implementing it in like the agile or the DevOps way of working, where we threat model like individual pull requests or stuff that is being refined, which is way smaller. And you can use like another diagram or maybe a sequence diagram for that, because those are like tiny bits. And then you threat model only what you are about to develop. Whereas if you look at whatever the whole systems that's already there, I tend to see that as like technical depth, and we threat model that like ongoing. And whenever we find something that needs to be discovered more in depth, we just put it back on the Kanban, on the to-do or the backlog, so it's being processed in the normal workflow.
Can you ask your question? Because I think it was really good, because I want to answer it. But
well, yes, yeah, okay. Well, the question was when we were talking about the Python and the automated tools for architecture. Obviously, like those tools are very welcome, but I've run into the situation where an architect goes, yes, but we already modeled it into this DFD, so why should we do this? We can also already use a DFD, for example. So I rather like to use whatever way an organization models their application in whatever way, as long as it's correct, and take it from there, and not necessarily like force other tools on people.
Oh, absolutely, right. But you still didn't ask your question, because I think, okay, I'll say the question.
So, wait, Dennis, before you go into that one, let me try and defend in double quotes myself here. So okay. The thing with the pushing the tool, I totally agree. I totally agree. You have to find something that works for your team, and you should not change your team based on a tool. Okay. Now, what I want to justify here is that Pipeitm does not exist as a tool by itself. It was sort of started together with a different threat modeling methodology, which pushes a continuous threat modeling approach. So the interest here was to say, okay, you have this beautiful DFD, which is an SFG or PNG or whatever, and it's difficult to maintain. It's difficult to change as the system changes. So Pipeitm is heavily into that corner of the system may change very fast, so let's do something that can change together with it. Okay, that's my parenthesis on why a tool. Perhaps sometimes it's interesting to reassess if you want to go with that thing that the architect did, which is sometimes frozen in time, and you want to move to do that investment of moving towards a tool that will let you change things as they happen, which nowadays is more common than not. Sorry, Dennis, back to you.
No, absolutely. Well, look, I think you hit it pretty well, right? I would say that Pipeitm is just a nice wrapper. It's just a nice Python, almost like API to create threat models, right? But the fundamental here is that you should always use whatever the developers have, whatever the architects have. That should always be your first point of call, and you should never try to force into them something that you have until you get there organically, right? So I'll give you an example. Like I was actually working on a project, and we went to the architect and says, how does your system work? How do things connect to each other? And he actually says, well, we got this big DFD, which is a pain, you probably don't want it, but we actually said, hey, give it to us. So we actually took the DFD diagram, we parsed it, whatever the thing was at the time, and we didn't use Pipeitm, we used a variation of actually one of the early versions of the GW bot, the security bot, and we actually created a nice visualization of it, right? Got to the point where when we actually were showing him, the architect, this thing, his version was already out of date, and basically they start to look at using our version, right? But the point here is that if they're using a DFD, that's a great source, right? In fact, what's interesting about it is to start to visualize it, because now you can do a threat model on top of the data points that they already have, right? And then you can say, what about this? What about that? And then the nice thing of those diagrams is you can show to the multiple players and then ask the question, is this correct?
there's kind of 2 or 3 different use cases here. You've got your very first one where the system is still in design and you're whiteboarding or you're working with architects, but you have no reference architecture. Then you have you move into then you have an initial threat model that starts to drift and it gets out of date. And then having something automated within Dot, or whatever, you can start diffing what you thought the threat model was versus what the actual system was. And then you get again into DevOps stuff where things are moving so quickly that actually you can't keep up the threat model updated, at which point it becomes the other way around, where the automated threat model is driving your threat modeling. And I think the tools and the approaches, depending on your audience, need to change depending on which particular phase you're at. In an ideal world, you'd have one IL or intermediate representation for your threat model, but it is the different phases require the different approaches.
Absolutely, man. Look, I think let's be clear, right? Whenever we talk about these solutions, right, you always have to go for the easiest thing that you have in front of you, right? And I always take the view that you consume whatever is there, you start with whatever the state of the art is, and then you make it better, right? If people have great diagrams, then you do it, right? Like the best threat modeling is when somebody shows you great data flow diagrams and up-to-date network information, up-to-date data flows, up-to-date architecture. But in most situations, that doesn't happen or is way out of date. So the security team actually has, I think, a great advantage, which we can come to the table and we can help, right, to visualize that. And the question I think you asked, which was really interesting, right, was, aren't we, are we basically how to make architecture models scalable and not so much about threat modeling? I actually weigh that the way you scale threat modeling is to make architecture modeling scalable, right? One cannot go with the other, because threat modeling in most cases is just a social engineering way for us to extract the architecture from the developers and from the management. What it is, right? Like if you look at it from an interesting strategic point of view, it's just a way to extract how the hell things work, right? Or how the hell they think is going to work, right, in the future, right? And then you apply security knowledge, right? So when I look at the threat models I do, in the past, I would probably argue that I would spend 80% doing architecture mapping and then 20% threat modeling.
Yeah, I mean, if they've got the diagram already drawn out in Visio, I'll use Visio for threat modeling.
Exactly.
I don't care what I'm using if that diagram is already there.
Yeah.
I've done some stuff with Paint where you just draw in boxes, because I know we're able to do stuff getting everyone around a whiteboard, but in a multinational company where you have engineering teams across 3-4 time zones, 2 or 3 continents, getting people into a room is expensive, difficult. So yeah.
And look, this is where now I'll put the card in to say engineering, right? Like I would say that if you're not putting engineering resources into your threat modeling efforts, you will hit very quickly scalability issues, right? And I'd say that from a security team, we have access to some engineering resources. The best way you actually get some resources from the developer teams. Like you need to scale the creation of diagrams and the creation of data and the mapping of data from reality, right? And that's why Pipeitm is quite interesting, because that's a path to do that. And I believe that's how we will scale threat modeling. In fact, when you look at, if you go back to the concept of how you do remote threat modeling, what I like about the concept of remote threat modeling is that it allows us to have access to the people that know what's going on. And in a way, you can even think of threat modeling as multiple phases, right? There's a phase of discovery, which, yes, probably a whiteboard with a pen and paper is the best one. The one you get at more mature cases, like, for example, some of the ones that Petra was talking about that we hit, there it's all about presenting reality and having the people that understand reality confirming that this corrects. And when you ask questions from security, we actually ask really hard questions, have the people in the room that can then answer those questions. And it's all about scaling. And in these days, until we solve it, if you're not applying engineering resources, i.e. if you don't have a developer that is working on how to visualize it better, how to make those APIs better, how to create DSLs out of your environment so that you can run it and you make the API simpler and simpler and simpler, you will struggle to scale.
Yep. And
Hey, okay for me to jump in for a second? I just want to point out something that I think some of you might be struggling with. I think one of the issues that a lot of people might have with something like Pipeitm is not so much the friction. It's not that it's not good. It's quite the opposite. The problem is that it is too good. And I'll explain what I mean, because this relates directly to the issue of remote threat modeling, right? When people see something like a good diagram, they want to make that better. They want to make it perfect. And then you start focusing too much on the diagram, which admittedly is really hard to do remote. It's really hard to do with these virtual whiteboards. Now, on the other hand, if you aim for something that is by definition explicitly crappy looking, people are not going to worry about how it looks, but they're going to focus on the discussion around it, which to me is an important part of threat modeling. Forget the diagram, whatever drives what did you say that Adam calls it? The squishy human parts of that?
Yep. The soft part of
right. That's the main part of the threat model, is that dialogue, that discussion around it. And if you have something that is pretty good, people are going to try to make that very good. Mm-hmm. And this comes back to how to use these virtual whiteboards by not trying to make it look good. But if you explicitly use the sketch that makes it look pretty bad, then people will feel more comfortable jumping in. If you have something that's pretty good, people, unless they feel very comfortable making it look great, they won't feel comfortable doing that. So they'll step back. And this comes back to confidence and remote participation and things like that. But if you keep it, you explicitly lean into all threat models are wrong, keep it looking crappy, people will feel more comfortable to contribute remotely, even be able to scratch with a handwritten pen on the screen, and it will look worse, but that's great because that's what drives the discussion. The other thing sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought you were finished, Savi. Carry on.
Never. I was just saying, the other thing that I think is really important, and this is a good segue into that, is that corporate culture. Some places it really works. People are very disciplined about Zoom conversations for others, and some places people are not used to that. Yeah, so that is also a big factor in whether you can do that remote whiteboarding. Now I'm done. Sorry.
Actually, since now we have a really great participation, let's try to create a convention. If you want to speak next, raise your hand on reaction, and then there's a little thing, raise hand, and then we just go around.
Where's the raise?
It's on reaction.
Reactions.
You go to reactions, you can go like this, see, and you can raise hand.
See it.
All right, but you already got the talking stick. So
okay, all right. Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that's Avi. That's an amazing point that you actually made, because I think we're all too focusing so much on the data flow diagram. Well, that's actually just the beginning. That's like even, that's not even step one. That's step 0.5, because that's where it all begins. And then the main discussion is actually, finding the threats around it. So like you said, Avi, like sometimes it's even good if the diagram is not perfect, because then, the architect can correct it. And that also drives him into the discussion, because the architect can say like, no, this is at least what happened with our experience, because the architect can say like, no, you put this in the wrong place. This actually connects to this. And then you can say like, oh, wow, okay, so what threat do you think it will be then? So I think the diagram, we shouldn't focus too much on it. We should just do it and then actually drive the discussion from it. And even if it's wrong, like Avi said, it's a good way to incent people to start talking on these sessions, because sometimes on these threat modeling sessions, what I've experienced, you have maybe the architect talking and the security team talking, but then you have like a couple of other devs who are there, but they just keep silent. But like if like you said, the diagram is imperfect, and at least we have a starting point with it, that's a great drive to actually start the discussion. And that's why I think like most of the time we shouldn't use so much of our time and resources to create that data flow diagram, but actually to kind of spark a discussion and move the discussion forward.
Yeah, engaging the people, the psychology of things. That's
exactly
interesting. And Izar wants to go next. Go on, Izar.
Yeah, sorry, I probably using an old client. I don't have the reaction button here. But anyway, you guys make awesome points. The thing is, and I have to keep bringing back to it, is that while the diagram itself is not the thing, when you are discussing something, when you are eliciting threats, it helps a lot for everybody to be talking about the same thing. So yes, I agree, the diagram is the 0.5 step of it. But especially remotely, bringing everybody to an understanding of what is it that we are building, answering the first of the 4 questions, is extremely important. Because otherwise, I'll be finding threats into something that in your mind is completely different. So I would posit that the diagrams, or whatever DSL we put in there, is the first most basic step for everybody to agree, what is it that we are building? So yes, it's very valuable to put time and money into that so that everybody can agree. And then move to any number of methodologies that we have out there to actually elicit the threats. But first of all, we have to agree on what we're talking about.
No, but that's, so, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't have to react. I'll stop.
No, I do it all the time, Petra, so please go ahead. Interrupt me as you want. Go.
Go on, Petra.
I apologize. Last time. No, I agree. There should be a diagram, absolutely. But I think we don't need to make it perfect, like Avi was saying. Like, there should be a diagram so we can all agree what we're building. But even that sparks a discussion so that, you know, we can start agreeing what we're building during the threat modeling session. You know, and yeah, like Avi's putting in the chat, it should be correct, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be there. We agree that we're discussing it, and then we can, you know, it will kind of be the thing that will start the main discussion of where are the threats. But yeah, definitely there should be a diagram, which is, yes, you know, simple, but there.
So, you know, I feel like I am shamelessly plugging so much stuff in here, but if you take a look at the threat modeling manifesto, and Avi knew exactly where I was going because of the smile. If you look in there, okay, it's something that we brought up in there. It's the passion for the problem. It's looking at the problem, trying to solve just that thing and not the other things. And I will agree. When you start talking about modeling, you get dangerously close to the famous sentence, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So we are looking for the useful one here. To me personally, the useful one is the one where the people involved in it are able to look at it and say, and agree, yes, this is what we are building. Because up to the point where, and this has happened to me a number of times, you have those eureka moments where the big architect is in front of the room saying, well, we built this thing based on this framework, and this thing connects to the other thing, and the other thing connects to the other thing, and that thing solves this problem. And the junior developer at the end of the table just like slowly raises his hand and says, you know what, that was the design, but actually we had to implement it differently because we had a number of constraints. And the architect all of a sudden is like, you know, the gif of John Travolta looking around? It's exactly that. The architect just goes looking around like, what just happened here? What happened? It's my system. Don't tell me that it's not the way that's in my head. So those moments are the ones where you move towards a model that better represents the system that you are building so that you can elicit those threats.
Dennis,
right?
Dennis has been waiting to speak. Go, Dennis.
Yeah, and I think you actually really went nicely is that where I was going to say that I feel that the power of threat model, right, when we do it right, is to allow reality to be understood and allow good risk decisions to be made, right? That's the objective of a threat model, right? We want to make sure that we understand what's going on, we make good risk decisions, we accept the risks that we're not going to do something about it, we know where the gaps are, we understand the maturity of where we are, which is actually where I look at it. The threat model gives you value, you know, at all stages, even when nothing is built, because you get to evolve it, right? And I feel that more and more, the power of what we want to do with threat modeling is to make sure that you get the right people in the room to understand what's going on. So for example, like the case that you talk about, which I've experienced many times, is actually, think about it, a massive failure of communication in the organization, right? The fact that somebody can design something that then gets implemented differently, right? It's, in a way, it's shocking, right? It's almost like a security vulnerability, a risk in itself, right? Because the development model is broken, right? So what we want is to make sure that the key players in the development of a system, from almost the business owner to the architects, to the developers, to the security team, to the testers, to the SRE teams, to the continuous deployment, almost like everybody involved in that, DevSecOps life cycle of shipping something, they all need to be able to look at something which is a common representation of reality and say, that is correct, right? And that's where you want to get to, right? And then the risk team is to take that, map into risks, and get the business owner to accept the risks, right? And then anything that you need to do in that requires a code change or require a config change or any kind of change should be backed up by a threat and a risk that we want to mitigate. So I actually, think that we get into the point where, threat modeling is maturing, right? It's not just about, doing the basic, which is just, okay, a lot of companies are still doing it, a lot of teams are still doing it. But I also feel that we want to get to the point where threat models are single points of truth, which also means that every time there's a significant change or there's a change in the application, the architecture, the threat model needs to be revised.
Okay, that's no longer a threat model.
Well, it is a threat model.
It includes a threat model, but what you're saying is we need to have a single design that everyone feeds into and keeps up to date, which, yes, absolutely true.
Yeah.
I just think calling it a threat model, and there's nothing wrong with this, is a stealthy way to get the organization to actually do that. Because I've done that before. I've gone round and said, okay, let's do a threat modeling exercise, because there isn't the documentation, and had meetings with individuals or groups to get that information out from them.
Yeah, but I would shamefully say that's the point.
Yeah,
I would say you can't have a correct threat model if you don't have a correct representation of reality. So the architecture diagrams, which should be consumed by the multiple players and the multiple layers of it, which is why I quite like the C4 thing that I've linked on the chat, which actually contains, I think is components, containers, construct, whatever that thing is, right? You want to have that model, but fundamentally, without a correct representation of reality, you can't have a threat model. And I actually think that threat models are a great way of doing that, because the security team cannot answer the question, is this thing secure? Can this go live without a threat model? While the developer team and the business team can ship a product with no documentation. So the security team is the perfect one to give this responsibility, because they cannot do their job, right, without the correct diagram and information. Avi, over to you.
I'm just curious what this correct threat model creature thing that you're talking about is, and does it fly?
Yeah, it's a correct representation of reality.
There's no such thing.
It is.
It's representation. By definition, all threat models are wrong. Sorry, Izar. It is
that line, all threat models are wrong, are just a nice way to get people involved where they don't freak out, right? Like, come on. Like, if you do a data flow diagram, the diagram is either correct or wrong, right? Like, either data goes from
I'm going to go back all the way to physics on this. All models are wrong. Some models are useful. Some models can be used to make predictions that you can act on.
Yeah, but come on, now you guys getting philosophical, right?
No, the question is, what is useful? It doesn't need to be correct if it is useful. If it helps you find relevant threats that you can fix, right? Then it's useful.
Yeah,
if it is
if you're pursuing
useless, doesn't matter.
Avi, you mentioned this one earlier. If you're pursuing perfection, if you're pursuing that correct threat model, anyone who's been on one of my classes knows about this. If you are going after getting it perfect, you end up doing absolutely nothing except diagramming.
But I didn't say that they had to be perfect. I said it had to be correct.
Yeah, but people hear correct.
Yeah, okay, but that's different.
And they understand perfect.
I would say that whatever information is there. Look, Isaac, can you show your diagram again, right? Please, right?
Here we go again.
The way I look at it is that either, think about it, right? If you're creating a threat model and the information in front of you is wrong, right? That's a problem, right? Look, here's the bottom line, right? Look, in this case, you're basically saying that the user enter comments into the web server, and that's a binary thing. either they do or they don't, right? So this is either correct or incorrect, right? If the comments are saved, right, the content comes from a SQL database, either you have a SQL database or you don't. Now, you could argue that some abstraction layers are not very good. You could argue that, that bit there is a bit of a, again, an exaggeration. But even then, as long as you define that, right?
Okay. Sampling theory, matrix of confusion. What you're saying is that the diagram must be accurate, but the diagram doesn't need to be precise.
Yes.
It has to express reality, it doesn't have to represent reality.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, but the farther you away from reality, the harder it is to be correct.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Well, no, it's not, because I could say it's got a database. That's still useful. I can still threat model and say there are these threats against the database. I don't need to know the specific technology. I can go one step up and say it's storing data. I can do privacy threat modeling against that.
Yeah,
it's
but
still
it's still
useful at any level of abstraction.
Guys, we have 10 minutes left, and we are supposed to be talking about remote threat modeling, not the threat modeling. So let's assume we have a diagram, and it works for the team that is doing the exercise. What are the ways that you guys have used and found useful? Like, talk about cornucopia or elevation of privilege. How do you do this remotely? I know that you have to ship the cards to people, and that is
no, EOP. There's an online version now.
But even with the online versions, you have to ship the cards, and the online
people just go to it and it generates the cards for them. So you've
generates
got
the cards themselves as well.
And there's a PDF available as well.
Yeah,
that's good.
So you can print at home.
I mean, we'll be talking about cornucopia a lot later on with categorization, but let's be honest, threat modeling really is just brainstorming around a design with a security hat on. So at that point, so long as you have something you can stare at with a group of people and all see approximately the same thing and draw some sort of security conclusion, it makes no difference if it's remote or in person. In person just makes it a bit easier because you can wipe off that bit or have that shouting match, and you can have the donuts, and the donuts are important.
There's requests to do a live threat modeling next time. We did do some in the actual summit this year, and I'm sure we will do some more.
Yeah, but actually, if the cornucopia game is now fully online, we should also do one.
Yeah, why not?
Timo, you look like you're ready to speak, man. You got the microphone, you're all poised. Go on.
Yes. I just wanted to raise my hand as it is proposed here, but I will just speak. Yes. I'm not sure if I came a bit late, but I think this is my experience. I tried out different things within the first step, the diagram creation. So one thing was that I bought a very good camera pointing to a whiteboard, and I tried to do threat modeling like this. Some people liked it and some didn't. One of the persons who didn't like it was me, because I would like that the participant actually draw and not that I draw. So that's why I don't follow that anymore.
But if you had more people with facilities or one other person, would that have worked?
Sorry?
If you have someone else to draw.
Yes, it helps me as there are mostly not more security people in the room. So when I do the moderation and drawing part, I can't focus on the application itself, and it takes me longer to understand.
Yes, James?
I was going to say that's not a threat modeling thing. That's a meeting governance. What you need is a chair and or secretary who can handle the meeting, have it circling, as Dida is doing for us here, managing the speaking. You can also have someone whose role is dedicated to taking notes or whiteboarding. Every single meeting benefits hugely from that. Someone who's not a participant, just there, taking notes, taking things down, able to focus purely on that.
And maybe even two people, because one person would be drawing, one person would be writing down the threats and the risks.
The chair and the secretary, if you're going with corporate governance.
Yep.
I
And
agree. Oh, sorry.
Oh, so go on. No, because I'm going to wrap it up because we need to finish in a couple of minutes. So go on.
Okay. I have identified for me that yes, I need a moderator, someone who does all the moderation things, but I wouldn't call drawing a moderation part. I like that someone stands there, maybe a junior, drawing the application.
Yep.
It's that is my experience. In the best case, a junior draws the application. So because otherwise it's always, that flow goes there, and that's very hard for someone who doesn't know the application. So yes.
Sorry, when I say a secretary, I don't mean someone dragged in from outside, but someone who can focus on just doing that, because they won't be able to participate effectively.
And just to wrap the whole thing together, right? I feel that infrastructure that you need to have around the threat modeling, whether it's somebody doing diagramming, somebody doing programming, somebody capturing the nodes, somebody mapping the risks. I actually think that that's one of the valued values that the security team can provide initially, because you have the experience. Ideally, you want to automate as much as possible that bit, but it's something that we have to do in order for this to scale, right? Now, on that bombshell, right, we're going to have to wrap it up, or else we go into the next session, right? And actually, we have an aim at Ask Me Anything with the OWASP board, but I think this was an amazing session, and thanks to everybody who participated. And I think it shows the really cool interest on threat modeling. And there's going to be another session, right, on threat modeling this afternoon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
6:30. Abbas, you want to say something?
You muted.
We cannot hear you.
No.
It's not a software mute. It must be a hardware.
Yeah, good thing you're not responsible for IT, right? No, I was still not working.
Hello?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I just want to say, let's have another session on like, to do a threat model. We are happy to be if we can have another part 2 or something like that, and we are more than happy to be involved, me and the team.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean,
look, the thing for that is to bring a couple of examples so we don't start from scratch, right? Because I think that was the problem in the past. So, right, everybody, thanks everybody for participating. I think you can start the recording. And
thank you so
much. On this, please come back and participate. And all the sessions are supposed to be like this, right? It's about collaborating.